today we have Hayden Covington with us. This should be really interesting. Do you want maybe to start with a quick intro on yourself?
Yeah, I can. I work for Black Hills Information Security. I lead the SecOps team in the SOC. So I work on the operational side, doing triage and SOAR and detection engineering and all those sorts of things. Before that, before working for an MDR, I worked for a Navy contractor. So we dealt with a lot of APTs and a lot of very interesting activity over there, which was a pretty brutal switch to go from government APT right over to private, where if something goes bad, you can't start ripping things out of the wall. You know, there's there's a little more restrictions about how you respond to customer things versus your own infrastructure. But yeah, that's me. Black Hills Information Security. When I'm not working on computers, I'm doing triathlons and other crazy things.
Nice. I agree. Where especially government, the thing you really care about is APT, and then switching to the outside. There's yes, in some cases APT, but most of the time there's like Bitcoin miners, and they're a
Yeah.
big deal, right? So it's a different mindset too.
Yeah, it's a lot more financial motivated versus like espionage and, intelligence motivated. So it's a big change in how well, it's sort of a change in how you defend against that. A lot of the core tenets remain the same, but there is some operational differences.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I was very, you piqued my curiosity with kind of the tagline of the things that you wanted to talk about, because I think, look, we've talked about AI ad nauseum. Everybody does all the time, but I think you kind of brought in an interesting spin on that, which is like, yes, they're AI, all that interesting things, but okay, how's the interface side with the human? I think is what it is, right? Yeah. So do
Yeah.
you want to get going? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to come across wrong as an anti-AI person. I use AI extensively. Like I meal prep, I use ChatGPT for that. I have some sort of subscription to most of the models out there, and I use it pretty extensively for calendars and tasks and all these other things. But I also am of the opinion that it is not going to be able to do everything for us for a very long time. And even when it can, I mean, everything can break, everything can go wrong, everything can be hacked. I think we've learned that over the years. But yeah, I mostly wanted to talk about like security operations and how you have to have a human involved in those things. Because there's a lot of companies out there now that tout the AI analyst. They talk about how they have AI enrichments and AI investigations and all these other AI features, like the AI buzzword bingo of whatever your business ad package is. But there has to be a human in the middle for a number of reasons, and I think there's a couple really good ways to do it. Yeah, but I'll talk about sort of. I mean, I have a couple very brief bullet points on my other monitor here, but like the main one is and the obvious reason that AI could go wrong is AI can be wrong. It's only as smart as the data that it's fed. It's only as intelligent as whatever that model is. And I've seen a number of cases in the SOC where, we have some local models that we can use to ask questions to on Black Hill's side. And I've seen cases where we've given it a command line and it's entirely wrong about what that command line would do. It misses a flag, it misinterprets a longer string because it may not be as well known. I once saw that it, said nothing was sensitive in this command line and there was a password in this command line just in plain text. And so it was not able to interpret this correctly. And so, I mean, that's one of the main obvious reasons is AI can go wrong. Another big one being prompt injection. That's a big thing that I also know a lot of folks on our team are looking into on the red side is how can you get around the protections put into these AI models. Those things are still so new, and in a lot of ways we don't really understand them as well as maybe we could or we should. And so there's always going to be something lurking in the background, right? Yeah, I don't want to ramble on. I'll keep going. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that sounds good. I think particularly maybe what I'm curious about is on the first part of what you said, right? Like
Mhm.
hallucination or common a common difficulty. Hopefully, it kind of goes better over time. But I'm curious. How do you see the reconciliation between we want to use AI to do all of these things, but we kind of know that it hallucinates a bunch of times. So what kind of human process
Yeah.
do you have to try to combat that? Like, and how do you see that trade-off?
Yeah, I mean, we have some rules in the Black Hills SOC that we've put out to our analysts, and the number one above those number one is don't put any customer data into an AI that we don't control ever. So that's a big one. If we don't control it or we don't have it validated for whatever reasons. But the number two is if you don't understand exactly what you're putting into this model, you don't have the knowledge to validate that it's correct. So in situations like that, we'll ask folks to go speak with a more senior level analyst, someone who might understand and have the context and experience to know when a model is incorrect. And I think that to that point, the best way that we can utilize AI in the SecOps space is through augmentation, not necessarily doing the full breadth of triage within an AI, but allowing the AI to assist with the menial work, with the reporting, going through huge swaths of data, and instead of trying to do the whole thing, present bits and pieces of information and allow that analyst to make a distinction. And I've seen a couple products that do that very, very well, Lima Charlie among them, where, within these AI things, we also have a SOAR that we use, and they use a lot of AI. We can take all of the alert data and summarize it at the top of this alert. And that is not going to go from point A to point B and then close, but it is going to give the analyst a quick couple sentences to read to get immediately up to speed when there may be 100 different alerts that have fired on this machine. And back to the LC point too, you guys have like an AI explain feature, which I found a lot of value in, because a lot of these detections are things that, once your stack gets so big on the detection side, it's pretty hard to know exactly what all of them are right off the bat. There's so many different CVEs and CVE specific detections. And as your DE process gets spun up and you put out so many detects, it gets to be so many that you can't keep up. And that's vulnerable or valuable time that you would be wasting trying to understand what this attack is. And so you can go and search it in ChatGPT, or you can use something like LC, click that button, and it will spit out a summary of this detection and give often what I've discovered to be pretty useful, insights into this. I looked at one this morning where there was an RMM tool that was running a lot of pretty sketchy looking PowerShell, but we know it's an RMM. It's just a PowerShell and VBS based RMM. But I was curious if LC's AI would be able to figure out if that was it, because if I didn't know about this RMM, or I, maybe was on the newer side, I would see somebody running a whole bunch of things from temp, running a bunch of JS scripts from temp, and think, uh-oh, this is interesting. But it picked up right away, like, hey, we've seen this, command string. This is an RMM. Clearly, we've seen this, in this context, and it's able to kind of flesh out if this were actually evil, this is more what it would look like. And I think that that's a really valuable way to use AI, is to supplement that foundational knowledge when you come into detections and when you come into alerts, so that you're not having to do the background research as to their intent. You can generate, what an example false positive might look like, what a true positive might look like, and have at least a little bit more context as you go into that detection.
Yeah, the other interesting approach that I've heard is like I agree. I kind of like these features. They also at the same time, I'm sure 99% here of the people like on the call, they kind of scare me in the sense that they can speak with a ton of authority while being wrong, which is fine. Everybody kind of knows that. But then if we pick that specific example that you had, right, of like, hey, like explain this. If you start from the perspective of like, hey, when I ask an AI, I may not be able to rely on this.
Yeah.
I feel like it kind of undoes a bunch of different use cases or like processes, right? Like I tried to think about really the processes like of like an MDR doing this at scale. If you can't say step one, like you trust that, then like how do we layer on processes on that? And one approach I've heard, and I don't know if you heard about that or tried it, but is to use I think it might even have been a guest on Defender Fridays that was talking about like a cohort of AIs
Oh
all
yeah.
looking at the same thing. And then in a weird way, it's like the old approach to like the computers they sent to space where they had to be resilient to like a radiation, right? Yeah, precogs, that rings a bell. I forget who we were talking to, but like that feels like that might be an interesting way. It's a pretty brute force way to attack that, though.
Yeah, it's almost like the thinking and reasoning models, but instead of that same chat GPT model running against it, you're pulling in others to get other context, which I think is a really cool idea. There are some tools out there that are, I think it's open source, but you can, add your own API keys, but then you can ask a query and it puts it to several different models at the same time in different windows. So you can compare those outputs. I mean, I think that'll be a really great way to validate things. But I mean, even at the same time, I think the risk is kind of high to rely entirely on AI for triage of things. And I think that if you remove the human from it, there will always be that risk of error. And until we get to the point where the AI doesn't hallucinate, I think that there just has to be a human to validate that it is correct. Because, like you said, it will say things with a lot of authority, and it can be so very very wrong. And all it takes is one junior analyst that comes and looks at this summary that says, "Yeah, the files that are running at a temp and JS or whatever, these are good. Go for it." And they go, "Okay, well the AI said so, and it has a lot more data than me," and so they close it. And I think that's always going to be a risk. And like you said, there are ways to mitigate that. And I've seen some really good models. There's Sublime that has really good AI models for reviewing user reports, and they claim that in a lot of cases they are better at clarifying those, or their model is, than human analysts. And I think that they probably have some weight behind that from some of the reasonings and assessments that I've seen. Same again with LC is for some of these very complicated detects that have fired on, kind of abnormal data. I would almost take the AI explanation as an introduction and use that as very valuable information to start on. But even so, even within, like, I have it open on the other screen now, the explanation of that alert that I was looking at goes into bullet points of what to look at next to make sure that it is correct. And I think that's the right way to do it, is the models they can say things with authority, but they have to then present, here's how you make sure that it's correct. Like that has to be, it can't say things with authority and say, I'm right, go do this. Like we can't get to that point yet.
I really like that last thing that you mentioned. Everything's prompt, but like the idea of asking that first one to kind of go and say, like, now imagine that you're wrong. How would I prove that? And then to get a different model to come in, and that problem gets exponentially easier if you're actually talking about real data, right? So the explain detection is hard in a bubble, whereas if the question was like, is this a valid format? Well, there's data on that, so we can loop in a validator for that format. I think it's pretty interesting. I haven't played with them much, but there's also like grounding APIs now. I know Google has, where you can essentially tell it like, hey, just go on the web and try to find that stuff. And so getting those different AIs to kind of like prove each other, adversarial AI, that sounds pretty cool.
Yeah, and I mean, you mentioned exponentially, but it's going to get exponentially better too. Like even as we get all these MCP servers, as we have all these other functionalities, it can only improve incredibly rapidly. Like we see something new every single day in the AI space that you think, oh, maybe we could use this. Like I had an advertisement of all things for an app where you could have an AI make a phone call for you. And so it's getting to places where I wouldn't have really thought we would be a couple of years ago. I'm sure many people probably share that sentiment, but I mean, it will continue and it will rapidly keep going that direction. And I mean, we can take advantage of it and use it to augment our security, or we can fall behind. And I don't think it's an option to take advantage of it at this point. I think it's a requirement.
So I had not heard about that phone thing. I wonder
Yeah.
if it's going to lead to a resurgence of war dialing.
We were
Back in the
talking
old days.
about that the other day. Yeah.
That's I want to try to get into this insurance company, so I'm gonna set an AI to have all these conversations with like people, and
Yeah.
chances are I'll hit at least one that will give me their password to log into their thing.
Yeah, and they're good too, especially the conversational ones. Like I had a dishwasher issue, and I don't know the first thing about dishwashers, but I was able to show ChatGPT like underneath of this dishwasher, like, hey, what does this thing do? And it's just chatting with me about these different parts. And I didn't touch into the electronics because I didn't know whether it was right, and I couldn't validate, and I didn't want to electrocute myself. But it gave me enough to realize, like, okay, I've done the basic things that you would do. I now know what the next steps are, and it also gave me those next steps is call someone that knows what they're talking about, and that's generally the advice we give in the SOC as well on our side is use AI, like especially on the boring things, on the things that aren't, you know, up for debate, the things that are concrete. Like if you have a set of notes and a ton of notes on an investigation, there's nothing wrong to format these, to check these for errors and typos and do all this different stuff using a model that we have on our end. Like those are the sorts of things that are, you know, unequivocally going to happen before too long if they aren't already. But in cases where, you know, if you don't understand this command or these processes that are running or this CVE, you need to ask somebody who knows how to figure that out just to make sure that it's right. And I think it is to the point, like kind of like you're saying, it's to the point where it's right most of the time. I just worry about the one time that it isn't.
Yeah, and I think you kind of touch on a good part of this, which is in security, we very often think about the AI. We go straight to the meat of security, right? Like, hey, tell me about the CVE. But running an MDR or an enterprise, like in a team, there's a ton of other use cases that are probably quite impactful, even if they're much lower false positive, lower stakes,
Yeah.
all this kind of thing. Like I'm thinking we recently revamped how we do the AI generation of a rule, and one tidbit that I thought was really interesting was how we split up this task in multiple AIs, and the first one is very simple. We query a very basic model where we just say, what platform is this talking about? Like, that's the
Mm.
first step, right? Like, is this talking about EDR? Is this Office 365? Like, what is this about? Because that is going to cut through the biggest part of the problem space where we can then kind of focus and do these things. And I bet there's a ton of those things where it's
So
just do that on the alerts. Like, does this feel high, low? I don't know, like big stuff like
yeah,
that.
I mean, there's so many things we can take advantage of, and the way that things are now, like you have to take every advantage that you can get. Like within the SOAR, we can enrich with all these external sources, but if we can also send it to an AI to get another sense of enrichment or another determination about whether maybe our process has failed and these hashes have never been hit on or they're hit on and they all look legit, but something is wrong. Like there can always be that extra layer. Like that's been a thing since the beginning, the defense in depth, and I don't see why AI can't just fit into that slot. But it also can't be the only layer of defense you have too. Yeah, I use it a ton. I use a ton of AI, and I think the real benefits come from you relying on it to do things quickly, or you relying on it to do things and explain things that are very complex. Like, I mean, I have two examples that come right to mind. One of them is, within Cursor, I can add documentation that I want it to reference for certain things. And so I can say, yeah, here's all the LC docs on how to write DNR rules. I want to start a rule for this thing. Here's the attack that I saw. Here's the actual JSON of that attack. Make something for me to start off of. And it gets you to that starting point. Same with the other example was we were on an IR and I came across an alert I'd never seen before for a CVE I'd never heard before. And I was like, all right, so this is fun in the middle of this situation. I need to go research this CVE. But instead, I just take the CVE and dump it into a model and say, tell me what this is, tell me what to look for, and tell me, a couple other things. And then I just went back to what I was doing and could go back a few minutes later and get a a brief summary of what this looks like, which would have been way better than going to Google and getting 19 ads, and then you click on a link finally and there's 40 pop-ups and they want you to subscribe to their newsletter and everything in between.
For sure, for sure. And somebody mentioned in the chat, like I feel like that's not a new piece of advice, right? Like I feel that's been right for a long time. But like, hey, if this task is boring to you, it's probably a good candidate for automation. And
Yeah.
and I think that kind of brings us a little bit into also this idea that AI, we're talking like sometimes maybe bad, hallucinate, like all these things. Um, is there an advantage perhaps in generating deterministic processes from AI, right? Like I'm kind of wondering if there's a place where instead of saying, hey, here's an alert, tell me if it's a high or a low, we get to a point where we once a day feed, like the last 6 months of alert to an AI, and we say, give me a Python script that gives me that I can actually look at, I can review, and I know it's going to operate the same way every time. And then you kind of automate the generation of that. That's kind of intrigued me as an idea. I have no idea if it would work.
Yeah, I mean that kind of touches on something that I've tried to suggest on our side, and I think we'll get there eventually. But training custom models on alerts that we've processed before and their dispositions, like if we can feed it, 10,000 false positives and 1,000 true positives, and then we can feed it all of this information, we can, instead of relying on a market model, we can rely on something that knows how we operate, knows things that we've seen in the past, understands a little bit more of our environment. And I think that that's where it would get really cool to be able to ask these things that are trained on your data specifically. I think that would get us to a really cool place. Yeah, and someone, like you said in the chat, mentioned the things that are boring. The thing that a lot of people hate is documentation. So I taught a quick workshop on how to do detection engineering. And one thing that I showed was, hey, we're going to look at this threat report, and this is going to show this whole attack that has happened. We're going to give this to an AI and tell it, I want to detect this thing. Write some documentation for me on that and include search syntax. And it spit out something that, I told the students, this is not bad. This needs maybe some validation. There's a couple of things that aren't quite what we would need them to be polished, but it did a really, really good job and saved a few hours worth of research. And again, a lot of those things like the MITRE TTPs, a lot of the very specific things that are going to be right or wrong, they're not really going to be as negotiable. Those things, it can do a really good job of surfacing those for you. And if you do disagree with them, it's easy to remove them or add others, but you don't have to go through and slowly pick through and decides which ones that you want to map to it and which ones you don't. So I do use it a good bit for note taking and note summaries. And, I have a model hooked into my notes too, that I can just ask questions of my thousands of pages of notes and stuff too, instead of searching for things.
Nice. So at a SOC level, right?
Yeah.
Where do you either see things going, or where do you want to sort of investigate yourself? How do you see the path forward in bridging kind of those problematics with the people in the SOC? Like what's the future vision for you?
Yeah, I mean, we're still building out our SOAR. We're putting a lot of time and effort into that. The first easy win for us is we have summaries right now for the cases. Enhance those with AI. That's the easy win. Is we use our AI in the SOAR and we dump the detects that have fired. We dump any context about if those are at-risk users or things like that, and we can surface a summary to get analysts up to speed. I mean, that's the easy win. But then another really good one does come to like the email and alerting space. If you can add an additional step of filtering, add another layer of somebody, even if that somebody's a computer somewhere, looking at this and providing some sort of classification, even if it's wrong, you have another data point. There's a data point there for you to look at, and there's something usable out of that data point. And especially for emails are very, almost all of the times that I've seen, they're either evil or they're not. There's not really a whole lot of gray area in there. It's a fish or it isn't. It might be marketing and that might feel like a fish, but ultimately they just, are trying to sell you something. A little bit evil, no. But there's cases like that where if I can go through and dump all these IOCs into an enrichment source and I could check the hashes and IPs and all these other things, but then I can also ask an AI, hey, here's the email, here's the context, here's what the email looks like, trying to figure out if it's going to trick the user in some way. The AI vision is a really big thing too that we could rely on for stuff like that, where the emails that try and get around detections with different display techniques, we can present these to try and determine if they're trying to fool these users and then feed all that into a model. And again, I prescribe to a belief that I would much rather have too much data than too little, especially in terms of like context too. Some people, there is a turning point where that's too much, but I've never been one to shy away from too much data. We were joking just before that I have a Garmin and a Whoop. Like I'm never one to shy away from having too much data. I would rather, have a little bit more context to work off of than, not enough and have to go digging for other things. I think I answered your question. I went a little off the rails.
So I think that's what's interesting still, like to this day. It's early with the AI stuff, is like every time we have a conversation, there's new ideas coming out. I mean, you just mentioned using the vision to determine if somebody's trying to fool a user.
Yeah.
And that's super interesting. I don't know how much it would cost today to run this. Certainly you couldn't run it at scale on enterprise email. But that's a really cool idea.
Yeah, I almost imagine there could be like some sort of heuristic detections that look for certain patterns and then you run the vision. So if you see something that might be abnormal, then you spend that extra time to run that vision. Almost like if you're checking hashes in a SOAR and they all check out and they're all signed and they're all normal, you wouldn't need to waste an API hit on whatever your tool you're using to go search that hash again. But if something shows up and you've never seen the hash of this file before, maybe you want to sandbox it. Maybe you want to take a look and see what it actually is and, check some additional things. So I think if we use it intelligently, things like vision can be a really big thing. I've noticed CAPTCHAs are getting a lot more ridiculous to work through in some cases. Like there was one site where I, as a human being, spent 10 minutes getting really annoyed trying to fill out this CAPTCHA, which was like, it was like multi-step, like 6 different completions you had to do. And each one had like 20 variations. It was crazy. And I was like, is this where we're at now? Is this like, we need these CAPTCHAs to be this advanced? Otherwise, I think we are, is the answer. Yeah, it's a little scary, especially when you think about them using it on the red side. Like you talked about the ward driving, like that is a concern too, right? If you could have AI make all these different calls for you or generate videos, especially like the Google VO videos, like those are really good. Like there was a clip I saw online showing different news clips. And then at the end of the news clip, the announcer turns to the screen and says, "I'm not real. This is an AI video, but would your mother be able to tell the difference?" And I worry that a lot of them wouldn't be able to because they've gotten that good. Ugh. It is also exciting though.
Yes, and on this very scary ending, I mean, it's it's easy to go down that route. It'll be our job to stop it indirectly sometime in the future. We'll get there. We'll get there.
Use the AI to fight the AI. That's the answer.
Exactly. Thanks a lot for joining us. That was super interesting. If people want to get in touch with you, is there a better way to do that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm on LinkedIn, just Hayden Covington on LinkedIn. That's probably the best way to do it. I check that pretty frequently. But yeah, thanks for having me on. It was a lot of fun talking about SOC and AI, 2 things that I spend a lot of time on. So no, I appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you. And we'll see everybody next week in Defender Fridays. Have a good weekend.
Awesome. Thank
Take
you.
care.